Hi, friends. We're tuning in for Religion 100 lectures. I hope you are staying warm. I hope you have power, and I hope you're safe. You might hear some things in the background, like a dog that just came in the room, or my space heater, or dripping water from the bathroom next door so that the pipes don't freeze. But we'll continue with our lecture. I'll try and be quick. Just a few notes for you. So this lecture will be available for 12 hours, and then you will take the quiz that goes along with it. That quiz is available for 12 hours. And all of my PowerPoint with notes will be posted on Canvas too, so you can access if there are certain words that you thought you missed or definitions. Those will be there for you as well. And you can use the PDF version of those PowerPoints for the quiz if you need. Some of this is going to be review for a couple of people if you were present in class last week, and then we'll all be caught up basically, and at the very end it'll be some new stuff. So let's start going through what are called ancestral narratives, or sometimes they're called the stories of the patriarchs. I don't use the word patriarch because there's a lot of matriarchs in these stories as well, the women of the stories who get a chance to speak, be active participants and characters in the story. We have been telling these stories in Genesis of the creation of all of humankind. And now we're shifting focus as if to go and zone in like a movie camera on this one family. And we'll be following for the next, I think, is it 40 chapters? Genesis is 50 chapters. 10 were of like the creation of humans. Now it's the story of this one family, and we'll follow their few generations for 40 chapters. These are complicated stories. No one in this story comes out looking really good. And one of our thought labs at the end of this week will be asking you to explore which character in the story you feel connected to or you feel drawn into, is the language I use. You don't have to like everything about them. Maybe there's just one section of their story that was really intriguing to you. You felt, oh, I've been through something like that. I know what that's like. I can sympathize with that moment in their life, right? You don't have to accept everything about who they are, because what people of faith, I guess, would say is nobody is valued as all of the worst things they've ever done, right? People of faith believe in redemption, believe in restoration and reconciliation in relationships. And so these stories are told as a way of showing that humans are complicated. Humans mess up. These humans, though, in this story mess up really terribly and do some pretty awful things. These are not sanitized stories. There's lots of just content warning. There's stories of rape, there's stories of incest, there's stories of murder and killings and family dynamics. And so know that those stories are coming, and we'll kind of talk through them about what those stories mean and represent for the people who were telling them in ancient times. So complicated stories about complicated humans. We start with Abram and Sarai. Their names are not Abraham and Sarah yet. They are Abram and Sarai. That's Abram, and Sarai, Sarai. Their names will get changed later. Name change in Scripture is a sign of transformation, a sign of commitment, a sign of a new beginning for a person. So we'll get to that part of their story in a second. But Abram and Sarah live in this corner of that Fertile Crescent near some water. And very late in their life, I think it says they were 70 years old, God comes to Abram and says, you're going to leave everything you know, all your family, all of your wealth, and you're going to be traveling through the desert, and you're going to follow along either one of the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. I think it's the Euphrates. And you'll come to a new place where I will show you, and this will be your land. I will give it to you. And the scary thing about that is to leave everyone you know. This was a culture where you relied on your family, and your family wasn't just your mom and your dad or your nuclear family. It was built out this huge structure of cousins and aunts and uncles and long, big systems of people being connected to one another so that they could provide for each other because they lived in a shared communal kind of space. And so to remove yourself from that meant you might be inviting famine, might be inviting dehydration, a death by dehydration, or you were also removing yourself from a legacy because you no longer had a story that you were connected to. People, they didn't have a written language yet, and so the only way you were remembered was by your family telling your story. The other thing to know is that Abram and Sarai are cousins. They are married. This was not a weird practice happening at that time. It was called, let me look up the word again. It's called endogamy, when you marry within your family. Endogamy is endogamy, mostly to keep that structure safe. But we'll see throughout the story, lots of people married their cousins. So that was a cultural practice they did. So Abram and Sarah are cousins. They leave Haran, or no, Ur is where they start out. That's not important for the story, but Abram says, okay, God, I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to leave my whole family, and I'm going to go where you tell me to go. They leave with one nephew named Lot. Lot will explore part of his story later. They go along the Euphrates, and every once in a while, Abram encounters God or goes out and prays, and God shows up and says, yeah, you're doing the right thing. You're on the right track. And so Abram will build an altar to God there and then keep going. They arrive up in Haran, and it's a larger city. There are people there, so it's not the promised land that they've been told, because Abram was told it's going to be your land. It doesn't belong to someone else. You're going to take it over. But it's kind of a rest on their journey. And then there's a famine that happens. And to avoid the famine, this is kind of a detour in the story. Abram and Sarai escape to Egypt to try and find food and stuff. This is not a part of their journey. But the important thing to know is about the story of Abram wandering in the wilderness, willing to trust that there's something good on the other side, going through a difficult period of not knowing, of not understanding what is going to come ahead, and to continue to push forward. The people of faith will come to call this the faith of Abraham, right? Saying yes to uncertainty, saying yes to trial and struggle, hoping and believing that they would say that God will see you through, that you will arrive at something else. So that might be a part of Abram's story that you recognize, like, oh, I've been through difficult times. I know what that's like. And something came out of it, right? Or maybe I'm still waiting for something to come out on the other side. I won't detour a lot on the stories there, but just as an example, that's a part of the story I often identify with, wandering in the wilderness and not knowing what the future is going to hold. So Abram and Sarai take this detour to Egypt, and I'm going to pull up the story here. In Genesis 12, they're about to enter into Egypt, and Abram looks at Sarai and says, okay, you're smoking hot. And once we enter into the city, everybody's going to fall in love with you. And so I want you to pretend to be my sister. And that way they won't want to kill me, your husband, so that they could marry you. it's really kind of stupid logic, right? And they enter into the city, and who shows up but the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt? And of course, what Abram said was true. He sees Sarai and he says, "Oh my God, she is smoking hot," and wants to take her. The Pharaoh wants to take her as his wife, and so Abram, says, "Yeah, go ahead, take her as your wife." So Abram basically sells his wife, because then in return he gets tons and tons of animals. He is given, this is like a dowry basically. He's given people as slaves, servants, to serve in his household. He then grows his wealth by selling his wife to the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh has been tricked by Abram and gets sick. His whole family starts to come down with this terrible disease and infection, and Pharaoh realizes it's because he was tricked by Abram into marrying this woman who was already married. The interesting thing is we don't hear anything from Sarai. We don't know if she consented to this. We don't know if she has lots of agency in the other stories. So it makes me think she had no agency. It was just Abram's getting rid of her in order to make a profit. Because we'll see later on, she does a lot. And so what is Sarai feeling in all of this? Is she resentful? No idea. But so the Pharaoh comes back to Abram and says, get out of here. Take everything. I don't care that I gave you all of that stuff and now you're a wealthy man. You're making me sick. You lied to me. You're ruining my family. I'm going to die. Get this woman away from me. And so Abram and Sarai run away. They have now become very wealthy, though. They could live in this huge compound, basically. So they move on to finding the promised land. And what we believe is they come to find it. It's kind of a remote place. They settle in the area that will become Jerusalem. It's occupied by some people, and God kind of says, like, oh, they won't be there much longer. You're going to have this later. In the meantime, Abram and Sarai still haven't had children. They are old. But they start their journey when they're 75 years old. They're like 99 years old now. Sarai has gone through menopause, meaning she no longer has a period. She can no longer carry babies in her womb, or her. If you know anything about menopause, which lots of people know very little about, it's that you go through this change where you were able to get pregnant and now you're not. It's a hormonal thing, and so Sarai is no longer of age to be able to have children, and it's a question of like who was untenable, whose body was unable to produce children. We don't know, but Sarai, so they don't have kids, and they're getting really sad. God has come to Abram and said, I'm going to make a great nation of your family. You are going to have as many children as there are stars in the sky. And you have to think, there was no light pollution at this point. There was no big cities. So you would go out at night and the stars were gorgeous. Maybe the sky was bright because there were so many stars, right? God says to Abram, I'm going to give you as many children as there are sand grains in the desert. If you go to the beach, there's a gazillion little beads of sand. And this is like a huge promise God is saying to Abram, and Abram's saying like, it's not going to happen. You're making these promises that are biologically cannot be fulfilled, right? And it hasn't happened our whole lives. We're almost 100. We're too old. There's not a lot of time left. Physiologically, we can't do it, right? Like, I don't know what you're thinking, God. This is where Sarai enters into the story with more agency. She comes to Abram and says, okay, I know God's made this promise to you. I think God may have gotten it wrong, but I think I have a solution for us. You're going to take my enslaved woman. Her name is Hagar. It's spelled Hagar. You're going to take her as your lesser wife. This is the practice of polygamy, not polygamy. Polygamy is where multiple people have multiple spouses, meaning women can have multiple husbands. This is if it's a heterosexual relationship, or men can have multiple wives, or multiple partners, depending on your orientation. But polygamy is the practice of men having multiple wives. So polygamy is spelled Polyggyny. So this would be the practice of polygamy. You're going to take on this enslaved woman, Hagar. She's going to be a lesser wife. Like, I'm going to be the head wife. And if she has any kids, those kids I can claim as my own. And this is how your family and our legacy is going to continue. So Hagar, again, we'll see she has agency. She has conversations later. In this story, she is given no words. We don't know if she gets to consent to this. So it sounds like a story of forced marriage, forced rape, possibly. And so Hagar is given over to Abram. Abram has sex with her. She becomes pregnant. So then it becomes apparent that the problem was with Sarai. She couldn't have kids all those years because Abram can now conceive with someone else. Sarai becomes enraged that this has happened so easily for Hagar. And, I would imagine feeling shame, anger, hurt, all the things. But she takes it out in an inappropriate way. She has forced this woman into a marriage, into rape, and now she says, I'm real pissed. I want you, Abram, to take that woman and send her away. I cannot have her. I can't even look at her. This is so upsetting. And Abram passes the buck and says, she's not my enslaved woman. She's yours. You deal with it. And so Sarai sends Hagar out into the wilderness. At this point, it's into the desert. And we have to remember, being sent into the desert, and now they have left an area near the Tigris and the Euphrates. So being sent out, there's no water. You're not going to find anything out there. So Sarai is sentencing Hagar to death. Hagar goes out into the wilderness. She is distraught because she's pregnant with a baby she didn't want. And now she's going to die alone. And I want to read this portion. This is in Genesis 16. So we've got this enslaved woman. And what happens? God shows up to her in the wilderness. This is called a theophany. Theophany meaning God, an appearance of God to someone, or a messenger of God, or sometimes called angels. In this story, we'll see that it is actually God. It's not an angel. God shows up by a spring, and God tells her to go back. You got to go back. I know you're running. I know you were sent away. I know now you're running away because you would rather die than live with Sarai. But you need to go back because the baby that you're carrying is going to be a big deal. You're going to name him Ishmael, which means God sees. And he's going to be a great leader, and he's going to, there's going to be all kinds of, a promise of that same generational growth of your family is going to come from you, Hagar, is going to come from Ishmael. This is called an annunciation, an announcement of birth. And there's tons of them throughout Scripture. We'll come across lots of them. Another one in just a few moments. But an announcement, she receives the first annunciation this poor enslaved woman. And so realizing that she has been given this promise from God during this theophany, and she's willing to go back. She's willing to raise this baby, even though Sarai doesn't want her there, even though it's painful just to be around Sarai and these people who hate her. She says, I'll go back. And I'm so grateful that God saw me in my suffering. And so she does this extraordinary thing where she names God. God has changed. Remember, the name change means a transformation has happened. She names God because God has seen the poorest of the poor, the most suffering of the most suffering, and God has had compassion. And so she names God El Roy, El meaning God, like remember the word Elohim, this is El Roy, meaning God sees me. So Ishmael is named God hears, and Hagar names God El Roy, God sees me. It's a beautiful story of a woman taking control over her situation, of encountering God, of getting a voice in the conversation, of getting remembered as the only person, I think, to name God. It's really cool. So she returns. Sarah is not too happy about it, but they're kind of putting up with it. She gives birth to a son named Ishmael. Abraham and Sarai are at their, I know this is going on for a long time. That's why we're recording this. If you need to take a break and pause and walk away and then come back, that's totally fine. I should have said that at the beginning. But now we're in chapter 17, Genesis chapter 17. Abram and Sarai are back at their compound. Remember, they have now come to the promised land. They've got all of this wealth, so they've set up a life for themselves, and they are, kind of living the dream, except for like the whole Hagar thing that's happening and the probably complicated dynamics that are happening there. Abram's kind of like chilling, resting, and he sees these 3 figures walking through the desert. Remember, walking through the desert is a sign of distress, a sign that you could die. And they would practice this form of hospitality. It was practiced among many cultures in that area. It later gets codified or like written into importance as a law for the Israel people. And I'm going to read that one real quick. This is from Leviticus chapter 19. That's right. Verses 33 through 34. So this comes later in the writings, but this would have been a regular practice that they would have done. God commands them, when a foreigner resides among you in your land, or maybe like approaches you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were a foreigner in Egypt. That's the story of Moses that we'll get to in just a little bit. I am the Lord your God. So it's a command of God to care for the stranger, to care for the immigrant, to care for the foreigner among you. And so maybe some words for us today. Abram sees these 3 strangers walking through the desert and he panics, like, oh my God, if they don't see us or find us, or maybe they're tired and exhausted, I gotta go help them. And so he gets up and he runs. Remember, he's an old guy. He starts running. Running was a sign of humiliating yourself. You didn't move running quickly in this culture. You walked slowly. But instead, Abram says, I got to make sure these people are taking, what if they are so hungry and thirsty because they've been wandering? I got to help them. And so he runs out to them, which is a sign of generosity and hospitality and helping. He says, come. Let's come into my house. I'm going to get you everything you need. He says to Sarah, go get some cakes, get something to drink. Like, we got to help these people and take care of them. It turns out these 3 people are a theophany, messengers of God that have come disguising themselves as humans. Abram doesn't know that, He just, out of the generosity of his heart, wants to protect them. And they have come to tell Abram something, an annunciation, that Sarai is going to give birth. They are sitting around the table, and the theophany, these three folks, say to Abram, you're going to have a son. It's not the son Ishmael. You're going to have a son by Sarai. And it says, this is not the right story. You're going to have a son by Sarai. Sarai hears this outside the tent, and she starts laughing because she's like, oh my God, I'm so old. I don't know if Abram can perform anymore. Like, how are we going to be the people who have children? This laughter leads into what Isaac's name will be, which Isaac's name means laughter. I skipped over a story because that was Genesis 18. This theophany happening. It's a sign, and so I'll back up in just a second, but it's a sign of God showing up. It's a sign of Abram's generosity, a sign of like his impulse is to protect and care for the other, the most vulnerable. He didn't do that for Hagar, did he? Right? But in this instance, unknowing that it is people of God or messengers of God, he still takes care of them. I need to back up and go back to Genesis 7. So that was Genesis 18. Genesis 17 is a very important story that I always forget to tell because it, but anyway, Abram is out in the fields at night, and there's another theophany. He hears God's voice. God says, hey, I know you have had this child with Hagar, named Ishmael. You're still going to have a large number of descendants. He's standing out there among the stars, and God reiterates, all those stars, your descendants are going to be as numerous as all of those stars. Don't forget that. And Abram says, well, why can't it be through Ishmael? Oh, that you, God, would see Ishmael. And God says to him, no, that's the miracle. It's coming from Sarai. I wish you would get it through your thick skull. I wish you hadn't intervened, but now that you have, I'm going to take care of Hagar and Ishmael. Don't you worry. He doesn't really, God doesn't really promise him in this moment, but I'm saying God will eventually. But God is saying, I am choosing Sarai. I am choosing what's coming after Sarai. And what does Abram do when he hears this? He laughs. Again, both parents, Abram and Sarai, both laugh at the annunciation that they will have a child together. God says, to do this, I'm going to build a covenant with you. You might remember that after the flood, we talked about the Noahide covenant, the covenant that God made with Noah, saying, I will not destroy the world ever again. I will build a bow. Remember, it's not a rainbow, but a bow, kind of like building that firmament again, and that pushing back all the chaos of the waters and protect the earth. And the Noahide covenant was one-sided. It was just God promising to humankind. This is now called the Abrahamic covenant. God says, I'm going to change your name. You are no longer Abram. You will become Abraham. Sarai is no longer Sarai, but she will be named Sarah. That's Sarah with an H. Her name means princess. Isn't that cute? But this covenant, this Abrahamic covenant, is two-way. It is God promising you will have descendants through Sarah. Now her name is changed. As many stars in the sky. And to do this, you will promise yourself and all of your people to me. And to do that, you'll practice circumcision. Circumcision was a practice that was happening throughout the ancient culture in the Near East. it usually was like either a purity culture, like to purify someone, or a rite of passage at a certain age. A male, maybe like during puberty, would be circumcised to show that they're entering this new phase of life. But God says very specifically in this Abrahamic covenant in chapter 17, Genesis chapter 17, you will circumcise. Here, let's pull it up. You will circumcise on the 8th day of someone being born. So from the very beginning of a person's life, a man's life, a male person's life in this culture, they will be committed to God. And God then in turn will be committed to them. And this will be a sign of your culture that it doesn't happen just around puberty. It is a lifelong thing. It's a value of human life, but it's also a value of dedication. And so Abraham, his name has changed now. He goes back. He's not 8 days old, but he circumcises himself and all of the male people in his compound, all the enslaved people, all the children, anybody else that's there. This is their sign, their commitment. And then what grows out of this is a cultural tradition in Judaism that is still practiced. It's called the Bris, B-R-I-S. On the 8th day after a male child is born in Judaism, they bring in a traditional cleric, a clergy person who is skilled in this practice of circumcision. They're called a Moel, M-O-H-E-L. The Moel comes in and performs the circumcision on the baby, usually within the home. It's done on the 8th day after the baby is born. And this is a continuation of that covenant, a continuation of that promise of the people being connected to God and God being I guess I would go the people being, if you think God resides way up here, the people being connected to God and God being connected to the people. And Abraham and Sarah, now their names are changed. They are changed because of this commitment they have to God. And now possibly a belief, although they continue to laugh, right? Sarah laughs, Abraham laughs when they hear of this happening. But this potential that they will have a son. And they do. She becomes pregnant and gives birth in her 100 years to Isaac. And that's what they name him, Laughter. So we've done a lot of talking. Now getting to some of the complicated stories, right? Abraham, Sarah, complicated people, don't always do the right thing, right? Especially by Hagar. Yet they are people of faith, people who trust God, sometimes don't trust, sometimes do trust. Maybe that's the truth about human nature, is sometimes you trust, if you're a person of faith, you trust the higher power, and sometimes you're like, oh, I gotta do this myself because nobody's watching out for me, right? Humans are complicated too, but we're gonna shift. This is the part where if the Bible was a movie, that camera is gonna swing over to a different plot line. So you remember way back in the 30 minutes ago of this lecture, Abraham and Sarai, their names were Abram and Sarai then, were traveling. They left their family and they left with a nephew. That's the only family they took with them. His name was Lot. And then at some point, Abram was like, you go your way, I'll go my way. And so Lot goes off by himself. Lot has gone to stay in this kind of mutual town, kind of like you would think of like the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, called Sodom and Gomorrah. These two towns that were right next to each other is where Lot is living. So let's get into Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis chapter 19. This story often gets pulled out as an excuse for why LGBTQ people are persecuted. And what we will be challenging ourselves to think about is that an adequate use of this story? What would ancient people be reading into this story? So, two angels arrive into Sodom in the evening. This is a theophany again, to an encounter with God's messengers. But Lot doesn't know, much like Abraham, Lot doesn't know that they are messengers of God. They arrive in the evening, so everything's closing down. It's getting dark outside. Sodom and Gomorrah were known as a place of great violence. People would be mistreated at night. People would be abducted. They would be subject to rape. They would be subject to beatings and abuse. Lot sees these two strangers come walking into the city and goes, oh no, I see what time it is. We got to help them. And without thinking, this is again that generous spirit within people, like Abraham expressed. Lot runs to them and says, okay, come to my house. Come. I'm going to take care of you because you have nowhere to stay. Everything's closing down. And if you stay out here, you will be subject to violence. Again, this is that Leviticus command too. Like if you see a foreigner, you take care of them. You love them as yourself. You protect them. So Lot grabs them, takes them into his house, and the people of Sodom hear that there were these two strangers walking through, and they are bloodthirsty. They want so badly to take advantage of these people that they go, a mob forms, and they start to swirl the city looking for these two strangers. And they wind up at Lot's door because they found out who took them. And they go and they hammer on Lot's door and they say, let us in. Let us have access to those two strangers. And the way it's kind of described in the scripture is Lot kind of squeaks out the door and then pushes it closed really far behind him to protect these two theophany messengers of God. But still, Lot doesn't know that. And Lot's standing outside trying to negotiate with the mob. And here's what he says, which is really terrible. In chapter 19, Genesis 19, verse 7, no, friends, do not do this wicked thing. Here's the terrible part. Look, I have two daughters that have never slept with a man, two virgin girls. Let me bring them out to you. You can have them. You could do whatever you want to my children, but do not do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof. So Lot goes to a big extreme, right? He says, we're going to protect these people, these strangers in our land. I'm going to do it. And to satisfy your cravenness, your bloodlust, your need to rape, I'll give you my virgin daughters. It's a terrible trade-off. People then interpret that as that the people of Sodom were practicing homosexuality. What they were actually practicing power over others, right? Abusive power over strangers. I don't like this story, but it's another story of that deep hospitality, that deep commitment to protect the vulnerable. It doesn't look well, right? It's not my favorite interpretation that Lot would offer up his children, women who didn't get to consent to this, apparently, because they don't say anything. And yet that's the story. The good news is the crowd disperses. They say, we don't want your daughters. We wanted these strangers. We wanted to ruin them with violence. And so the strangers are protected. The theophany reveals itself and they say, you got to get out of here. This place is too far gone. It's going to burn. And so Lot gathers up his family and they run. I'm trying to look it up. They get out of here. This is verse 12, chapter 19, verse 12. Get out because we're going to destroy this place. The outcry of the Lord against these people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. So we're going to destroy this town, this like twin cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, because they are so violent. Remember, God promised, I'm not going to destroy all of humankind, but I'm going to destroy this city, these two cities. And so they say, hurry, take your daughters, take your wife, get out of here. Everything's going to be swept away. Run so fast and don't even look back. Don't look back because the pain will be so great, right? This is a strange story again, but we believe it's an etiological story. Remember, the etiology meaning the story of how something came to be. And so as they're running, leaving their city, it starts to burn. And Lot's wife, having left everything she had in a hurry, like if a fire happens, you grab the few things you can, and then you leave behind everything you have. It's awful. And having been told not to look back, I can only imagine in her grief and in her fear, in panic, she does the thing that probably a lot of us would. She looks back and says, there goes our home. There's everything we loved. And maybe we didn't even love it. Like it was a kind of a terrible city to live, but it was ours. She looks back and immediately she crumbles into a pillar of salt. Now, we don't necessarily believe that this actually happened to her. It's a very sad story because now these two daughters were offered up as sacrifice and now they've lost their mother. We actually believe it's a story helping the people explain why there are so many salt deposits in this area. The Dead Sea is around this area. The Dead Sea is this big body of water, salt water, where nothing can grow. No animal life can live there. And these salt deposits would grow because there's so much salt within the ground even. There would just be these pillars of salt calcifying and growing everywhere. And so we believe this is actually an etiological story explaining the cause of why there's so much salt in the area. So that's a really interesting story about the burning of Sodom and Gomorrah, the creation of salt. It's tragic, right? All these women are either sacrificed or die. But it's not a story about homosexuality. It's a story about gang rape. It's a story about abusive power, abusing a stranger in a foreign land when they don't know anyone or don't have a place to go. It's a story about the importance of caring for the other. Again, I'm not condoning what Lot does by offering up his daughters. Thankfully, it turns out better for them, but a willingness to go out and care for. So it's two sandwich stories of that hospitality as well. Abraham caring for the theophany in the desert, Lot caring for the theophany in Sodom and Gomorrah. And really quickly, we'll close out with our final story of today, which is Hagar. The camera then pans back over to Hagar. So Abraham and Sarah, their names are changed, remember, have Isaac. And Sarah sees Isaac now, kind of growing, toddling around the compound, and she sees Isaac and Ishmael playing. They're brothers, right? And we're kind of unclear of how old Ishmael is at this point. It could be a toddler. It could be 13. Scholars kind of question based on the language that's used in this chapter 21 of Genesis. Sarah then does this horrific thing again. She sees the two kids playing and she's like, I cannot have that baby around, that child around. That's reminding me of the doubt I had of God. That's reminding me of this other woman who could have power over me because she had a baby first, right? This is the first son of Abraham, so he would technically maybe inherit more. I hate that woman. And And so she sends him away. Abraham begs with her, please, do not be distressed about the boy, he says. No, that's God. Sarah goes to Abraham. This is chapter 21, verse 10. She goes to Abraham and says, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. She is jealous. She's fomenting. Get rid of him. And Abraham is really upset. He has genuinely come to love this child of his first son. And he's like, I can't do that, Sarah. We're sending them to their death then. You know this. We've done it before. God comes to Abraham and says, don't worry. Don't worry about Ishmael, but also don't worry about Hagar. Whatever Sarah says, God says, you do it. And do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring. Because through Ishmael, we get the story of Islam. Muslims will trace their lineage back to those Abrahamic faiths. Remember, there are 3 Abrahamic faiths, and Muslims follow their lineage through Ishmael, through Hagar. And this is where God promises to do that. And so Abraham is worried. He sends them out with water. He sends them out with food, but they run out. They've gone out into the desert. Hagar again finds herself in this way, and she is watching her son die of dehydration. I think it's basically thirst. I don't remember if it's of famine as well, but probably dehydration would come first. And so she puts him under a bush, and she can't even watch him die. It's too painful. She has to walk away, and she starts crying. This is it. She says, don't let me look on the death of my child. And so she sits away and she's crying, and God hears possibly the voice of the boy, it says. Maybe he's mumbling under his breath his last words as he's dying. He's, delusional because he's dehydrated. And so God has another theophany, comes again to Hagar a second time, and comes with compassion. This is chapter 21, verse 17. I imagine God comes and sits next to her and says, what troubles you, Hagar? What's wrong, sweetie? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of your boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand. Hold him so lovingly, so tenderly. God promises now to Hagar, for I will make a great nation of him. And then all of a sudden, God opens her eyes and she sees a well of water. And she can run over and fill. They would have these skins, calf skin, camel skins, they would fill with the water, and then she takes it back to her son, and he can drink, and he's no longer dehydrated. He's not going to die. And the story kind of ends there, as if she wanders off, and it says they wander off into the wilderness. He becomes an expert at archery. And we lose the thread of her story here in Hebrew scripture, but we pick it up in Islam. There's a promise for her too. She doesn't get lost or left. And her story is so painful, and yet God continues to show up for her, and she continues to have these encounters with God. Sarah never gets that deep, intimate encounter with God. She's standing outside the tent and hears the Annunciation and laughs. God comes right up to Hagar multiple times. Hagar gets to name God, the God who sees my affliction, God who sees my suffering. I'm not alone in this. So we'll leave it there. We've gone through this, and we'll pick up with Isaac and his wife Rebecca. They're kind of smaller characters, and we'll keep going with this story of the Abraham line in our next class. One of the sections, if you're in my 12:30 class, you were supposed to complete a chart, a flood chart. I'm still trying to think about what we'll do about that since we're doing remote learning. If we're doing remote learning again on Thursday, I'll have some new updates for you on that. But now I think both sections of class, the 9:30 class and the 1:30 class, are caught up. So go take your quiz, use the PDF file notes if you need that, and stay warm, stay safe, dress warmly. That's the most important thing, is to protect your body from exposure, and eat lots of good food. Okay, thanks you all.